The soda can hit the white stone pavement with a dull thud, sticky liquid splashing across the polished boots of the guard. Under the sweltering summer heat at Arlington National Cemetery, the crowd froze in place, gasps of outrage cutting through the solemn air. Mason Whitaker, a 14-year-old in limited edition sneakers, smirked as he held up his phone, ready to capture a million-view moment. He expected laughs, maybe even a startled reaction from the stern-faced soldier. But Sergeant Daniel Everett, a guard of the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Regiment, didn't move an inch. Behind his dark sunglasses, his eyes held a fire no one else could see. What Mason didn't know was that the man he was mocking carried the heavy memory of a younger brother who had been killed in Iraq. And the tomb Daniel was guarding wasn't just marble and flowers, it was a symbol of honor, of sacrifice, and of secrets that were about to change the life of a boy, a family, and the way a nation understands the meaning of respect. The early summer sun spilled across the city of Seattle, glinting off the massive glass windows of Whitaker Technologies' headquarters of one of the fastest-growing tech corporations in the United States. On the top floor, in an office paneled with walnut wood and decorated with expensive art pieces, Robert Whitaker sat behind a massive desk. His navy blue tailored suit fit his solid frame perfectly, but his eyes remained fixed on his laptop screen, fingers tapping relentlessly across the keyboard. Robert was no stranger to this relentless pace: shareholder meetings in the morning, contract negotiations in the afternoon, and international calls stretching late into the night. But there was one thing outsiders rarely saw. He had almost no real time for his family. His wife, Victoria Whitaker, wasn't much different. Victoria was a high-profile fashion influencer on Instagram, with over 2 million followers. She appeared at every fashion party in New York, Paris, and Los Angeles, collaborated with luxury brands, and curated every photo she posted with surgical precision. For Victoria, every moment of life could be turned into premium content. Both Robert and Victoria loved their only son, Mason, but in a convenient way. 14 years old, taller than most of his peers, with a modern-cut blonde hairstyle, Mason always wore the latest hype-beast designer outfits, Supreme hoodies, off-white joggers, and limited-edition sneakers people camped overnight to buy. Mason had almost never heard the word no from his parents. Whenever trouble came at school, arguing with teachers, bullying classmates, or damaging property, Robert could make one phone call and the matter would vanish. Mason grew up believing money could buy anything, even forgiveness. One late May afternoon, as Robert wrapped up a video conference, Victoria stepped into his office, holding a latte. "Darling, I think we should go to Washington, D.C. next week," she said, her voice animated. "Memorial Day is coming up. It would be amazing to get some shots at historical landmarks, Arlington National Cemetery, the Lincoln Memorial. Patriotic brands would love it." Robert looked up, frowning slightly. "Washington, D.C.? You know how busy I am. I've got to meet with the Japanese investors." "You can work from anywhere," Victoria replied smoothly, smiling. "Besides, it would be a great chance for Mason to learn some history, give him a little real-world experience." Mason, sprawled on the office sofa with AirPods in and eyes glued to his phone, spoke without looking up. "Why go to D.C.? Sounds boring. Do they even have any TikTok shops there?" Victoria sighed but kept her tone patient. "You'll like it, Mason. We'll be staying in a luxury hotel, eating at famous restaurants, and I'll take you to all the hottest photo spots." Robert shrugged. "Fine, we'll go. But I'm bringing my laptop." 3 days later, a glossy black SUV rolled up to the entrance of the Ritz-Carlton, Washington, D.C. A valet opened the door, and Mason stepped out. his brand-new Louis Vuitton backpack slung over one shoulder. He glanced around with little enthusiasm. The next morning, the family began the history tour Victoria had meticulously planned. The crown jewel on her list was Arlington National Cemetery. In the car, Victoria checked the itinerary while live streaming to her followers. "Hi everyone! Today our family is heading to Arlington National Cemetery to honor those who sacrificed for our country. We're going to get some incredible photos to share with you all." Mason groaned. "More photos? That place is just graves, right? What are you gonna post on Instagram? Chilling with the dead?" Robert frowned, but said nothing. In his mind, the trip was simply another way for Victoria to generate social media content and make Mason look more cultured. A few miles away, at Arlington, Sergeant Daniel Everett was preparing for his midday shift. His navy blue uniform was pressed to razor-sharp lines, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, every badge gleaming under the sunlight. Daniel was one of the few selected for the Tomb Guard, the sentinels of the tomb of the unknown soldier. At 32, tall and broad-shouldered, Daniel embodied absolute discipline. He had served in both Afghanistan and Iraq, facing life-threatening danger more than once. But the greatest loss of his life hadn't happened during his own deployment. It was the day he received news that his younger brother, Corporal Joshua Everett, had been killed in a bombing in Fallujah. The two had made a promise. If one of them fell, the other would carry on, protecting and honoring those who sacrificed everything. For Daniel, guarding the tomb wasn't just a duty. It was a vow, a matter of honor, and a living connection to the brother he had lost. That afternoon, with the sun high and the temperature nearing 92 Fahrenheit, Mason and his parents entered the ceremonial area of the tomb of the unknown soldier. The crowd of tourists, veterans, and military families stood solemnly behind the rope barrier, their eyes fixed on the guard, whose every movement was precise down to the centimeter. Mason stood in the middle, a cold soda can in hand, scanning the scene for the perfect shot. He had no idea that within minutes he would become the center of a story that would be talked about for weeks by the press, on television, and all over social media. The steady footsteps of Sergeant Daniel Everett echoed across the white stone, resonating through the still air like the slow, deliberate beat of a heart. Every step he took, every sharp turn, every crisp click of his heels carried the weight of discipline and reverence. Behind the rope barrier, Mason Whitaker stood with his arms crossed, a cold soda can resting lightly against his arm, his eyes darting around as if searching for some kind of entertainment. Instead of absorbing the solemn atmosphere that blanketed the space, the teenager looked bored, exhaling loudly, as if being forced to stand somewhere meaningless. "This is so boring," Mason muttered, loud enough for a few nearby visitors to glance his way. Pulling out his phone, he opened his camera and began filming with a mocking tone. "Guys, check this out. A real-life robot soldier. Back and forth, that's it." A couple standing nearby frowned. An older man, in a neatly pressed suit, shook his head. But Mason didn't care. He aimed his phone at Daniel, zooming in on the soldier's stern face behind his dark sunglasses. "Wonder how hot it is under that hat. Bet he's sweating like crazy." Robert and Victoria were standing a few steps away. Robert glued to his phone answering emails, Victoria adjusting her selfie angle, neither paying attention to their son. Mason suddenly noticed the half-empty soda can still in his hand. His eyes lit up with the kind of spark that usually spelled trouble. Glancing quickly around, he muttered to himself, "This is gonna blow up online." Before anyone could stop him, Mason flicked his wrist, and sent the soda can sailing over the barrier. The metallic thud rang out sharply as it landed right in front of Daniel's boots. Sticky liquid splashed in tiny droplets across the mirror-polished leather. The air seemed to freeze. A few gasps and murmurs of, "Oh my God," broke the silence. Daniel didn't move. His stride continued, unbroken, as if nothing had happened. The only sign of change, the muscles in his jaw tightened, a faint vein rising near his temple. He had faced far worse. The whistle of incoming fire, the sudden shock of explosions, the sight of comrades falling beside him. But this was a different kind of challenge, a direct insult to what he held most sacred. On the other side of the rope, Mason burst out laughing, turning the camera on himself. "See that? Not even a flinch. Total wax statue." A group of tourists eyed him with open disapproval. A mother pulled her children closer. A young man muttered to his friend, "That kid's got no respect." But the attention only fueled Mason's smugness. He stepped closer to the rope, leaning toward Daniel, voice dripping with mockery. "Hey, soldier boy, you gonna wipe those boots? Or are you not allowed to talk to regular people?" At that, Robert finally looked up from his phone, frowning. "Mason, what are you doing?" "Step back." "Relax, Dad. I'm just having a little fun. They get paid to stand there, right?" Mason replied, his tone dripping with arrogance. The words landed heavy, cutting through the fragile quiet. A few veterans in the crowd exchanged grim looks, some shaking their heads in disappointment. Daniel kept his stride, but inside, his heartbeat quickened. Images of his brother Joshua flashed through his mind. That bright grin under a soldier's cap, and then the gut-wrenching news he would never come home. Still oblivious to the thin line he was crossing, Mason raised his phone again. "All right, time for the money shot. Selfie with the statue." He suddenly lifted a leg, stepping over the rope marked, "Keep back." The murmurs in the crowd turned into alarmed exclamations. Phones came out, capturing the moment. Mason strutted toward Daniel, holding his phone high for a selfie. "Guys, meet the real-life statue. Guaranteed 1,000,000 likes." That was the breaking point. In a flash, Daniel pivoted and stepped forward, his movement swift and precise. His hand clamped firmly around Mason's phone, yanking it away before letting it drop to the stone. Crack! The shatter of glass rang out like a gunshot in the quiet air. Mason froze. His eyes went wide, his jaw slack. Then the shout burst from his mouth, sharp and indignant. "You broke my phone! That's the newest iPhone. $2,000. You're gonna pay for that." Daniel returned to his post, stance perfect, as if he'd never moved. But around him, the air had shifted. The crowd buzzed with whispers, some nodding in approval, others stunned at the display. Within seconds, uniformed personnel began moving quickly through the crowd. Lieutenant Sarah McAllister, Arlington's security officer, led the way, her eyes scanning from Mason to the shattered phone to Daniel. From here, the real storm was only beginning. The air around the ceremonial area felt as if someone had gripped it tight. After the sharp crack of shattering glass, the crowd froze for several seconds before the noise began to swell. Whispers rippled through the space. "Oh my God, he just crossed the barrier." If that soldier weren't bound by protocol, kids these days have no respect. Several people instantly raised their phones, capturing the scene from every angle: the shattered iPhone lying on the stone, Mason's stunned expression, and Sergeant Daniel Everett standing in perfect posture. An elderly man in a blazer with a veteran's pin muttered to his companion, "If this had been back in my day, that kid would have been hauled out long before now." From the back of the crowd, Blue uniformed security personnel appeared, moving quickly and decisively. Leading them was Lieutenant Sarah McAllister, a seasoned Arlington security officer in her 40s, sturdy build, brown hair pulled into a tight ponytail, and eyes sharp as glass. Sarah strode directly toward Mason, her gaze sweeping across the crowd before landing on the boy and the shattered phone. Her voice carried clearly, firm without needing to shout, "What exactly just happened here?" Robert Whitaker immediately stepped forward, his face flushed red with anger. "Officer, your soldier just assaulted my son and destroyed his phone. This is an act of violence. I will be calling my lawyer immediately." Victoria jumped in, her voice pitched high. "You cannot treat a child like this. He's only 14. This is an insult to our family." Sarah didn't flinch. She gestured for two security officers to stand near Daniel, then turned back to Robert and Victoria. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker, your son threw an object at an on-duty guard and crossed a restricted barrier. That constitutes assault and trespassing on federal property. Both are violations of federal law." Mason gaped at her. "Assault? It was just a soda can." Sarah's gaze didn't soften. "A soda can thrown at a federal officer on duty is assault. Crossing a marked barrier is trespassing. Age does not exempt you from responsibility. This is a sacred place, not a playground." The crowd behind them began murmuring louder, many nodding in agreement. A woman in a blue blouse shouted, "That's right! Get them out of here!" Robert tried to keep his voice authoritative. "Do you have any idea who I am? I can make one call to board members who control companies connected to this very site. That soldier's career will be over with one phone call from me." Sarah crossed her arms, her voice still steady and cold. "I know exactly who you are, and I know federal law. Here, your business card and your bank account are worth less than a single "Do Not Crosses" sign. Your son violated it, and everyone here saw it." Meanwhile, a group of young men at the edge of the crowd were quietly filming and whispering. "Post it now. What hashtag should we use?" "Number Arlington Teen. Easy to remember, fits perfectly." Within minutes, the first clips hit Twitter and Instagram, Mason throwing the soda can, Daniel's unbroken stance. The moment the iPhone shattered, all cut together with mocking captions. The first tweet read, "When you think you're the center of the universe, but the universe gives you a reality check." Another, "This kid needs a refresher on the word respect." Sarah signaled to two officers, "Escort them to the security office. We'll handle this there." Robert protested, "No, we're not going anywhere. I want to speak to the cemetery director right now." Sarah replied firmly, "The director is in the security office. If you refuse to cooperate, I will have military police escort you." Victoria tugged at her husband's arm, realizing from Sarah's unyielding stare that she wasn't bluffing. In the end, the Whitaker family was led away, moving through a parted crowd. Phones were raised, filming. Some people even whistled mockingly. Online, the hashtag Arlington Teen shot into the trending list within half an hour. Posts tagged with it quickly racked up tens of thousands of views and shares. Local reporters began reposting clips with sensational headlines. "Rich teen disrespects tomb guard at Arlington." "Disrespect at a national symbol sparks outrage online." Robert's phone kept buzzing with calls from his assistants and PR team. On the other end, voices were urgent. "Sir, this is spreading fast. The company's stock has already dipped. The press is digging into your family background." When they entered Arlington's security office, the atmosphere shifted entirely cool, quiet, and lined with historic photographs of the cemetery. At the center table sat Colonel Linda Chavez, commander of the Tomb Guard unit, a woman in her 50s with neatly cropped silver hair and a gaze like steel. The door closed behind them, and Sarah gave a concise report of the incident. Linda listened, then turned to Robert and Victoria. "I'll be direct. Your son has committed 2 federal offenses, but because he is a minor, we may consider an alternative, if you're willing to cooperate." Robert's eyes flickered, but he tried to maintain his tone. "I'm willing to compensate. Name the price. Let's make this go away." Linda leaned back in her chair, her voice low and firm. "This isn't about money. It's about respect, and your son has just proven he doesn't understand the meaning of it." The security office door closed behind the Whitaker family, shutting them off completely from the noise and prying eyes outside. The cool air from the AC hummed softly, and the gentle lighting reflected off black and white photographs lining the walls, images of solemn guards through the decades, wreath-laying ceremonies, and endless rows of white headstones. At the center of the room, a long glass-topped table sat neatly in place. At the head of the table was Colonel Linda Chavez, commander of Arlington's Tomb Guard unit. In her 50s, with neatly cropped silver hair and a perfectly pressed uniform, her gaze was as sharp and unyielding as steel. Lieutenant Sarah McAllister stood to her right, arms folded, while 2 other security officers kept position near the door, their eyes alert. Robert and Victoria took their seats, while Mason lingered behind them, still in shock over his shattered phone, eyes darting down toward the floor to avoid meeting anyone's gaze. Linda opened the folder in front of her, her voice steady, deliberate, and weighted. "I'll be direct. Your son's actions today violated 2 federal statutes: assaulting a federal officer on duty and trespassing into a restricted area." Robert immediately leaned forward, trying to keep his voice calm, but still carrying an air of authority. "I understand, but I'm sure we can find a reasonable solution. I'm willing to compensate. Name your price." Linda lifted her head, locking eyes with him for several seconds before answering, "Mr. Whitaker, this is not about money. This is about respect. Here at Arlington, we honor those who gave their lives for this country. No one has the right to turn this place into a joke, not even your son." Victoria frowned, her tone sharpening. "But he's only 14. He didn't mean to hurt anyone. It was just childish mischief." Sarah, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Ma'am, age does not exempt someone from responsibility, especially when the offense occurs at a site of such symbolic and sacred significance." Linda closed the folder, her voice dropping lower. "I have 2 options. 1. Refer this case to juvenile court. If that happens, there will be a record that could follow your son for years, impacting his future. 2. I allow an alternative one that is far more educational." Robert leaned forward. "And what is the alternative?" Linda turned her gaze to Mason. 4 weeks of community service here at Arlington. You will work alongside the grounds and maintenance crew. You'll be up at dawn, cleaning headstones, maintaining the grounds, and learning the history and significance of each section. During this time, you will also attend sessions with veterans to understand the meaning of honor and sacrifice." Mason blurted out, "What? I'm not some kind of janitor." Linda's voice sharpened. "No one here is just a janitor. They are the people who preserve the dignity of this place, and for the next 4 weeks, you will learn to respect that work. If you refuse, we move immediately to juvenile court." Victoria let out an exasperated sigh, leaning toward her husband. "We can't do this. We have tickets to Paris next week. Everything's booked: hotels, restaurants, even a photo shoot for a brand. We can't cancel." Linda turned to her, her tone calm but immovable. "Mrs. Whitaker, your family's vacation is not more important than your son taking responsibility for his actions. Paris will still be there. This lesson cannot wait." Victoria's eyes widened, as if she couldn't believe someone had just flatly dismissed her. "You don't understand. I have a promotional contract there. If I cancel, I could lose hundreds of thousands of dollars." Sarah cut in, her voice like ice. "And your son will lose the only opportunity he has to learn respect. You've already seen how the public reacted today. This is the time to correct, not to avoid." While the air in the room was taut as wire, Robert's phone began to buzz relentlessly. He reluctantly took it out and saw the name Evelyn, his senior assistant. He answered, and Evelyn's urgent voice came through. "Sir, the news about the Arlington incident is spreading fast. The hashtag number #ArlingtonTeen just hit the top 5 trending topics nationwide on Twitter. The company's stock has dropped 3% in the last 40 minutes. The press is trying to contact us for an official statement. If we don't manage this carefully, it could get much worse." Robert clenched his jaw and cut her off. "I'll call you back." He hung up, turning a heavy gaze toward Linda. In that moment, Robert realized that no powerful phone call could erase this. People had seen it, recorded it, and the internet never forgets. Linda stood, placing both hands on the table. "My decision is this. Mason Whitaker will report tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. to Arlington's East Maintenance Section to begin his community service. He will complete the full 4 weeks, no exceptions. If he quits, we will immediately refer the case to juvenile court." Robert was silent for a long moment before nodding. His voice came out hoarse. "Fine. We'll comply." Mason opened his mouth to protest, but caught the cold look in his father's eyes and swallowed the words. Victoria crossed her arms tightly, her lips pressed thin, clearly still unwilling to accept that her Paris trip had just evaporated. Linda gave a short nod, then turned to Sarah. "Prepare the paperwork and the schedule. I want him starting first thing tomorrow." The Whitaker family left the security office in silence. Outside, a small cluster of reporters had already gathered, cameras and microphones ready. Sarah and the security officers escorted them out through a side exit to avoid the crowd. But Robert knew avoiding cameras here didn't mean avoiding the world beyond. The news was already everywhere. And now, there was only one way to shift the narrative. Mason would have to change. Truly, change. Week 1. The heat and the cold shoulder. At 6 o'clock the next morning, Mason arrived at the east gate of Arlington National Cemetery. He wore a plain white t-shirt, old jeans, and sneakers that were no longer the pristine status symbols he was used to. In his hand was the schedule Lieutenant Sarah McAllister had given him the day before. Without his parents hovering nearby, Mason was assigned to the grounds maintenance crew, 8 people, most of them retired veterans. They wore green uniforms, thick work gloves, and were already busy when Mason walked in. The crew chief, Frank Miller, a Vietnam veteran, gave instructions in a short, gravelly tone. "You'll start by sweeping the leaves in Section C5. Report back when you're done." Mason frowned. "I have to do it alone." Frank looked him in the eye. "Everyone starts alone." The others only glanced at Mason before returning to their work. No greetings, no small talk. Mason could feel the chill in their reception. In their eyes, he was nothing more than the rich kid who disrespected the tomb guard, the one all over the news. That first day dragged on painfully. The sun was harsh, sweat soaked the back of his shirt, and every time he thought about complaining, Frank would simply say, "Keep going." That night, back in his room, Mason sat on his bed, staring at the wall, with no interest in TikTok or video games. Week 2. Meeting Helen Brooks. On the 8th day, Sarah came to find Mason. Today you're meeting someone special." She led him to a small room near the archives. Inside sat an elderly woman with silver hair, slim but upright, wearing a pale blue sweater with a small red cross pin. "Mason, this is Helen Brooks, 94 years old, a nurse in World War II," Sarah introduced. Helen smiled gently, her eyes kind yet deep. "Sit down, dear." She began to speak, her voice slow but clear, telling of her days in Normandy at age 23. "You know, there were boys younger than you are now lying on stretchers, their uniforms soaked with blood, eyes wide as if asking, 'Ma'am, are we going to win?' And even when I didn't know the answer, I still had to smile to keep them calm." Mason was silent. This was nothing like the stories he'd heard before, no glamorous movie scenes, just the raw truth of war. Before he left, Helen reached out and gently squeezed his hand. "Those headstones out there, they're people like them. Don't you ever forget that." Week 3. The turning point. On the 15th day, Mason was told he would attend a wreath-laying ceremony at the tomb of the unknown soldier. He stood among the attendees, dressed in a plain white shirt and slacks, no flashy outfits this time. As the ceremonial music began, Sergeant Daniel Everett stepped forward. His posture was as straight as a pillar, every footstep striking the stone with precision and rhythm. No wasted movements, no glances to the side. Mason suddenly remembered the moment he threw the soda can. The image of Daniel then and now overlapped in his mind. But this time, his chest felt heavy. When Daniel stood before the tomb, lifting the wreath and bowing his head, the crowd fell into absolute silence. Mason realized this wasn't just a ritual. It was a soldier's personal vow to the ones who never came home. He swallowed hard, keeping his eyes on his shoes, until the ceremony ended. Week 4. Understanding Sacrifice. In the final week, Mason was assigned to work alongside Frank for a tour of the cemetery. Frank led him through different sections: graves of World War II soldiers, the mass graves of unidentified service members, and memorials to those lost in modern conflicts. Frank spoke as they walked. Some here were only 18 when they died. Some left behind families and children. Some were never recovered, only their names are etched in stone. Mason listened, for the first time feeling small in the face of these stories. He began remembering the details, not for a test, but because he wanted to understand. On the last day, when the work was finished, Frank shook his hand. "You did better than I expected, but more importantly, you started to understand." Mason nodded, his eyes slightly red. He knew the past 4 weeks had changed him more than the previous 14 years ever had. On the final morning of his community service program, Mason was told by Lieutenant Sarah McAllister that he would have a special meeting. Not outdoors, not at the maintenance section, but in a small, quiet conference room in Arlington's administrative building. Sarah only said briefly, "This is your chance to say what needs to be said. And it's also the time to listen." Mason stepped into the room. Inside, Colonel Linda Chavez sat at the head of the table, as stern as ever. Beside her was Dr. Elaine Porter, a 8-year-old psychologist with brown hair tied low, a calm face, and observant eyes. Across from them, Sergeant Daniel Everett was already seated. He wasn't in his crisp navy blue uniform or mirror-polished shoes. Today, he wore a simple white shirt and khaki pants. But his posture, straight shoulders, and composed gaze still carried the unmistakable bearing of a soldier. Mason paused for a second, then slowly took the seat across from Daniel. Linda gave a slight nod and began, "Mason, over the past 4 weeks, you've completed the community service program we required. Today, before we close this chapter, I want you to meet Sergeant Everett again. This isn't a hearing or a judgment. It's a chance for the two of you to speak openly." She turned to Daniel. "Sergeant, thank you for agreeing." Daniel nodded. "I want to hear what he has to say, too." Mason swallowed hard, his fingers laced together on the table. He took a deep breath, then looked Daniel straight in the eye. "I want to apologize, not just for throwing the soda can that day, but for the way I acted for dismissing what you do. Over the past 4 weeks, I've met people, heard stories, and I understand now I was wrong." Daniel remained silent, listening. Mason continued, his voice slower, deeper. "Back then, all I cared about was getting a funny video, racking up views. I didn't think of you as a person carrying out an important duty. I didn't think about the people you were honoring. I treated you like a prop in my joke." Mason lowered his gaze, eyes glistening. "Now I know that place isn't just a tomb. It's a reminder that some people gave everything, so I could stand there, free to do whatever I wanted. I didn't deserve that privilege." Daniel leaned forward slightly, his voice low but steady. "You know, when you threw that soda can, I've heard worse words in combat zones, but the feeling that day, it was different. It hit right into my memory." He paused, eyes dropping briefly to the table. "My younger brother, Joshua, died in Iraq when I was 20, almost your age now. A bombing. We'd promised each other that if one of us fell, the other would continue to protect and honor those who gave their lives. When I stand guard at the tomb of the unknown soldier, I'm not just doing it for honor or tradition. I'm doing it for Joshua, for those who will never come home." Daniel lifted his gaze, locking eyes with Mason. "And that day, when you laughed and filmed, I didn't just see a disrespectful kid. I saw a generation that could forget the meaning of sacrifice if we don't teach them again. That's why I didn't let it slide." The room fell silent for a few seconds. Mason blinked quickly, his voice trembling slightly. "I can't undo what I did, but I want to make it right. I want to keep learning these stories and share them with my friends, with people like me, people who never understood the full meaning of honor and sacrifice." Daniel nodded slightly. "Admitting you were wrong is a big step, but keeping that respect alive is the hard part. If you really mean it, keep listening, keep learning. That's how you honor those resting out there." Mason swallowed, then extended his hand. Daniel looked at it for a second, then clasped it firmly. The handshake wasn't long, but it was enough for Mason to feel the truth in it. This was recognition, and also a reminder. Colonel Chavez allowed a faint smile, a rare break in her stern demeanor. "I think you two understand each other better now. Mason, I hope when you leave here, you'll remember these 4 weeks not as a punishment, but as a turning point." Dr. Elaine Porter added, "I agree. Change doesn't happen in a day, but today, I see you've started walking the right path." Mason nodded, his voice steady. "I won't forget." As Mason stepped out of the room, the summer sunlight fell across the path leading to the cemetery gates. In the distance, rows of white headstones stood in perfect lines under the blue sky. For the first time, Mason looked at them, not just with his eyes, but with genuine respect. Just a few weeks after the community service program ended, the story of Mason Whitaker began appearing in the media again, but this time, the headlines were entirely different. From being the rich kid who disrespected Arlington, the press now called it a redemption journey. Articles recounted how Mason spent 4 weeks working at Arlington, meeting veterans, and completely transforming his attitude. Social media platforms shared images of Mason cleaning headstones, talking with Mrs. Helen Brooks, or standing silently at the memorial. These images spread just as fast as the original Soda Can video, but this time, most comments were words of encouragement and admiration. Mason decided to launch a personal blog called Honor and Sacrifice, where he wrote about his story, shared what he had learned from veterans, and explained the meaning of Arlington National Cemetery. He aimed his content at teenagers, people like his former self, who had never truly understood the value of sacrifice and respect. The short, honest posts, mixed with real-life photos and stories, quickly attracted thousands of followers. One of Mason's posts was widely shared. "That day, I thought I was laughing at a soldier. Now I know I was laughing at a promise, a tradition, and the sacrifice of thousands. Don't wait until you have to pay the price to realize it." Robert and Victoria changed too. They began spending real time with Mason instead of using money to buy peace. Robert postponed certain contracts to join his son in volunteer work. Victoria cut back on lavish parties, instead posting content about family values and community activities. They both came to understand that it wasn't their reputation, but how they raised Mason, that would be their true legacy. Sergeant Daniel Everett continued his duty at the tomb of the unknown soldier. Each step he took on the stone was still precise to the centimeter, every pair of shoes still gleaming under the Sunday. But now, he carried with him an extra story about a boy who once insulted him but found the courage to change. For Daniel, it was a victory not on the battlefield, but in the human heart. The story closes on the image of the tomb of the unknown soldier under a clear blue sky, endless rows of white headstones, the American flag waving in the wind. Unchanging, sacred, a reminder that honor and sacrifice are values that never fade. Mason's story shows us that mistakes can be the first step toward change if we face them and learn from them. What do you think about his journey? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Share this story so more people can hear it. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next powerful story. We'll see you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring inspiring journeys of courage, sacrifice, and moments that can change an entire life.